Every record you never want to break, the most career losses. Sergio Parisse's unwanted crown. Let's start with one of the most brutal records you could ever own as a rugby player, the most losses in Test history. That title belongs to Sergio Parisse, the Italian number 8 who racked up an astonishing 106 defeats in his international career. Now, think about that for a moment. 106 losses while wearing your national shirt. That's not just a couple of bad seasons. That's a legacy of disappointment stretching across nearly 2 decades. But the irony with Parisse is that he was far from a poor player. Most rugby fans, even outside Italy, regard him as one of the most talented number 8s of his generation, a player with immense skill, leadership and athleticism. Yet, he played for Italy during a time when they simply couldn't match up to the heavyweights in the Six Nations or on the global stage. His class was there, but the results never followed, and that's why this record is such a painful one. It's not just about personal failure, it reflects an entire nation's inability to compete consistently at the top level. For Parisse, every cap was a battle, but the scoreboard rarely rewarded him. 106 losses, that's not just a number. That's 106 times walking off the field with your head down, hearing the final whistle confirm another defeat. That weight sits heavy on any athlete. But if anything, it's a testament to Parisse's resilience. Most players would have quit, but he kept showing up, leading and hoping for change. That's grit, but it still doesn't erase the record he now holds. The longest losing streak in Rugby World Cup history, Namibia's nightmare. If we move from an individual burden to a national struggle, Namibia stands front and centre. No team in Rugby World Cup history has lost more games without a single victory than Namibia. 26 consecutive losses, not one win. Every World Cup cycle brings hope to fans and players alike, but for Namibia that hope has been systematically crushed every 4 years. Since their debut in 1999, they've faced the best, and the results have been unforgiving. 142-0 against Australia in 2003, the heaviest defeat in Rugby World Cup history. 96-0 against France, 87-0 against South Africa. The pattern is ruthless. What's worse is that the gap never really closes. Smaller nations like Japan or Georgia have managed to catch up, cause upsets, or at least show measurable improvement. Namibia, despite its passion, hasn't broken through that glass ceiling. And this isn't just numbers on a scoreboard. Imagine preparing for years, sacrificing everything, only to step onto the world stage and concede try after try with the scoreboard ticking relentlessly against you. That's psychological damage, not just sporting failure. And yet, like Parisse, they keep showing up. That speaks volumes about pride and resilience, but the record remains. 26 Rugby World Cup losses in a row. It's a record nobody else is anywhere near matching, and honestly, no one else wants to. The worst defeat margin ever, Australia 142-0, Namibia 2003. Speaking of Namibia, they also carry the burden of the worst defeat in Test history. In 2003, they faced the Wallabies in Adelaide, and it was nothing short of a massacre. 142 points to nil. That's not just a defeat, that's obliteration. Australia scored 22 tries. That's a try approximately every 3 minutes. Matt Giteau, Lote Tukiri, Chris Latham, they ran riot. Namibia could barely touch the ball, let alone cross the halfway line. Now, we often talk about sporting mismatches, but this was more than that. It was a clear example of the gap between Tier 1 and Tier 2 rugby nations. On one side, you had a fully professional squad preparing for a serious title challenge. On the other hand, part-time players, some of whom held regular jobs back home. The aftermath? Namibia was humiliated on the world stage, and even Australia faced criticism for running up the scoreline. But the cold truth is, this record still stands, and for Namibia, it's a scar that won't heal quickly. 145-17, New Zealand's demolition of Japan in 1995 comes close, but Namibia's 142-0 defeat remains the harshest lesson in what happens when the divide in rugby becomes too vast. The discipline disasters, most sin bins and red cards in Test history. Now let's shift from losing games to losing your cool and your place on the pitch. Discipline is everything in rugby, but for some players, staying out of the referee's book proved impossible. Take Michael Hooper, an outstanding flanker revered for his work rate and leadership for Australia, but even he holds an unwanted record, the most sin bins in Test rugby history. 8 yellow cards. That's 8 times sent to the naughty chair, watching your team scramble for 10 minutes while a man down. Then there's the rare and unenviable record of players receiving 2 red cards in Test rugby. Only a few names are on this list: Mario Cagnani of Uruguay, Alessana Tuilagi of Samoa, and Paul Emmerich of the USA. 2 send-offs at the international level, and that stains your legacy. Red cards aren't just individual shame, they hurt your entire team. One less man in rugby changes the entire dynamic. Concede territory, lose structure, and often concede the match itself. And when your name keeps cropping up on the wrong side of the referee's decisions, it's not just bad luck, it's a pattern of recklessness or poor decision making under pressure. And in rugby, that's unforgivable at the highest level. The World Cup's worst disciplinary tournament, 2019's red card plague. On the bigger stage, the 2019 Rugby World Cup in Japan carved out a different kind of record, the most red cards in a single tournament. 8 red cards were issued during that World Cup. That shattered the previous record and painted a picture of a tournament where discipline was in short supply. World Rugby had cracked down on high tackles and dangerous play, which meant players needed to adjust, and fast. But some couldn't adapt. Samoa, for instance, picked up 6 yellow cards across the competition, more than any other team. In a single match between Wales and Fiji, there were 4 cards issued, an embarrassing showcase of ill discipline on both sides. This wasn't just a matter of referees being strict, the game was shifting. The sport demanded safer tackling techniques and greater accountability for player welfare. Some teams adjusted, others paid the price in cards, suspensions, and disrupted game plans. And that trend didn't just reflect on the players, it was a statement about rugby's evolving landscape. Aggression and physicality were no longer enough. Smarts and control were the new currency. We've gone through individual disasters, team embarrassments, and disciplinary nightmares, but there are still more unwanted records to uncover. From the teams that couldn't stop losing to those who never tasted final victory, let's move to some of the most staggering tournament-wide records you'd never want your team to own. But before we talk about the next record, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you. The most penalties conceded in a single World Cup, Wales 2019. If there is one thing that kills a rugby team's momentum faster than a red card, it's an endless stream of penalties. And no team knows this better than Wales in the 2019 Rugby World Cup. In that tournament, Wales conceded a staggering 61 penalties. That's the most by any team in the competition. To put that into perspective, that's 61 opportunities gifted to the opposition to either kick for points, gain territorial advantage, or launch an attacking line out. In modern rugby, where every inch of the pitch counts, handing your opponent this many free shots is tactical suicide. And what makes this more frustrating is that Wales weren't a weak side going into the tournament. They were serious contenders, boasting a side packed with experienced internationals, many of whom had tasted Six Nations success. Yet, in the heat of the competition, their discipline crumbled. It wasn't just careless high tackles or breakdown infringements, there was a pattern of frustration leading to poor decisions. When pressure mounted, the discipline failed. And this didn't just put their defence under strain, it also shifted momentum in crucial moments of matches. For any team, especially one chasing silverware, conceding that many penalties is a self-inflicted wound. It's the kind of stat that coaches bring up in post-tournament reviews because it shows an internal collapse of focus, a mental and tactical breakdown on the biggest stage. Wales still managed to reach the semi-finals, but that penalty count could have easily been their downfall far earlier, and it remains a World Cup record no team would ever want to claim. The worst final win rate, France's painful 0% record. Then there's the record of failure that no nation wants, losing every Rugby World Cup final you've ever played in. That's the unfortunate legacy of France. Les Bleus have reached the final 3 times, in 1987, 1999 and 2011, and on all 3 occasions, they lost. That's a 0% success rate in the most important match in world rugby. That's not just disappointment, that's a national heartbreak, repeated threefold. The 1987 final was the first ever Rugby World Cup final, and France was simply no match for New Zealand. They lost 29-9, a clear defeat. But 1999 hurt more. France produced a miracle comeback in the semi-final to stun New Zealand, only to collapse against Australia in the final, losing 35-12. And then 2011, this was the one that truly stings. France lost to New Zealand again, but this time it was by a single point, 8-7. A match riddled with controversy, with many arguing that France were hard done by some critical refereeing decisions. But in the record books, a loss is still a loss. 0 out of 3 in World Cup finals. It's a record that lingers like a shadow over French rugby, a nation famed for flair, unpredictability and passion, but seemingly cursed when the ultimate prize is on the line. The longest losing streak in Six Nations history, Wales's dark era. When it comes to the Six Nations, no one ever wants to be remembered for this, the longest losing streak in the competition's history. That unwanted record is shared between Wales and Scotland, both suffering 14 consecutive defeats. Wales's nightmare stretch came between 2003 and 2004, a period that fans would rather erase from memory. Back then, the Welsh side was caught in a vortex of poor coaching, lack of squad depth, and a tactical identity crisis. They lost 14 matches in a row in what is supposed to be Europe's elite competition. That's not just bad luck, that's systemic failure. Every year, the Six Nations brings an expectation of competitive rugby, fierce rivalries, and national pride. But for Wales in that era, every match became a grim exercise in damage limitation. The media hammered the team, fans lost faith, and opponents came into every match expecting victory before kickoff. And this wasn't some obscure statistic hidden in the records. It was felt deeply in Welsh rugby culture, a nation that lives and breathes the sport. The pain of that streak led to a complete overhaul of the coaching staff and player development systems. Eventually, the changes paid off, but the scars of that era remain. Matching that streak, Scotland's run in the 1950s was equally grim, but in a very different era. Still, 14 losses in a competition of that prestige is a humiliation no rugby nation wants repeated. Worst World Cup team performances: Namibia, Zimbabwe and Japan, pre-2015. Let's go back to the global stage. When it comes to the worst overall World Cup performances, it's not just Namibia that gets a mention. Zimbabwe and Japan, before 2015, round out the trio of nations with the bleakest tournament records. Namibia, as we mentioned earlier, has 26 losses in 26 games. That's the worst in terms of pure results. But Zimbabwe's 2 World Cup appearances, in 1987 and 1991, didn't yield much better. They've never won a game either, and haven't even qualified since. Then there's Japan, whose pre-2015 record was dismal. Between 1987 and 2011, Japan played 24 matches, won only 1, and lost 21. Including that 145-17 defeat to New Zealand, the heaviest loss in World Cup history. But the reason Japan deserves a special mention is because of what happened after that. In 2015, under coach Eddie Jones, Japan pulled off the greatest upset in Rugby World Cup history, beating South Africa in Brighton, a match now simply known as the Miracle of Brighton. That victory flipped the script on Japan's World Cup legacy, but for decades before that, they were the perennial whipping boys of the tournament, a label that Namibia, sadly, has not yet shaken off. And that brings us to the end of the most brutal, unwanted, and frankly painful records in rugby history. Thanks for watching.